Good. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. This afternoon, we are recording this webinar. It'll be on the website at pts.edu/SYI, and will be available by email. So in the interest of recording, we're going to hold as many questions as possible. If there's something you really can't wait until the end to ask, go ahead. But we're going to wait until the end. We'll turn off the recording, and then we will enter a time of question and answer, question response. So welcome. For those of you who are familiar with the Summer Youth Institute, as I know most of you are, we have to start all of our gatherings by thanking our amazing donors at the Lilly Foundation and our incredible private donors who are so generous in supporting the mission of the Summer Youth Institute. The reason that we are doing this today, and the reason that SYI is beginning to talk about and to think about issues in youth ministry and in church life, is because over the last several years, our alumni board and our advisory council has been working to rethink what it means for the Summer Youth Institute to grow with our alumni. Many of you in this room, many of those who will be watching it in the future, are alums of our program. We have 470. Their ages now range from 17 to 34 or 35 years old. And what we continue to find is that their desire is to return to this community, to keep coming back, and to keep learning and growing with us. And that's an honor and a privilege that we take very seriously. So as we've been considering this with them, we've begun to endeavor into youth ministry conversations. We started taking what the Summer Youth Institute is, training students and thinking who God is calling them to be, what God is calling them to do, and taking it out into local congregations. We're really excited about this future, and the 19 years that SYI has been around has impacted many, many lives, and we're excited into the future to continue that great tradition. Our alumni chose this topic, chose suicide and suicidal thoughts. I was excited and stunned that when given the opportunity to ask big questions, even as adults, they keep hitting us. As kids, they come to SYI full of things to learn, all of these things that they've never had the chance to ask, and they ask, and they ask, and they ask for 2 weeks. And they come back 2.5 years later, and they ask, and they ask, and they ask. And now, as adults in their 20s and 30s, when we say, what do you want to learn? They give us big questions because they know we take their questions seriously, and they know that this is a safe place where any question is fair game. And so I am so thankful for our alumni for taking this seriously today. So our topic is the S word, suicide and suicidal thoughts. Giving voice to the S word, to suicide and suicidal thoughts, is real. Suicide is real. It is happening. Suicidal thoughts are real. They are happening. And I think one of the best ways to start this conversation is to share with you my story. My story with suicide starts when my father was about 8 years old. His dad had returned from World War II. Everything seemed pretty normal. This is all reports from my grandmother. She didn't know anything was wrong. And one day, her husband, my grandfather, went missing. No one could find him. They searched for over 24 hours. They still couldn't find him. At one point, my mom asked my dad, who was 8 years old, to go to the basement and look for a rifle to see if a rifle was missing from the hunting cabinet. And the rifle was missing. The cops started combing the woods, and eventually they found my grandfather. He had died by suicide. My father is 63 years old and is still haunted by this, still cannot get the words out. My grandmother, who is the one who told me about this over and over again throughout my adult life, reliving this, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what she could have done, what she missed that would have changed this situation. Even in her last days in the hospital, she was still talking about this with my dad, still saying, what did we do wrong? How could we have made a difference in his life? It was over 65 years before that this happened. Suicide is something that happens in almost everybody's story. Most people can think of someone, or maybe themselves, who have suicidal thoughts, suicidal behaviors, or who have had the tragedy, the deep, real tragedy of death by suicide in their own families, in their own churches. And it's hard, and it's real. So I give voice to the reality of suicide by saying, it's in my family, and there's a really good chance it's in some of yours. And so today we are going to look at suicide and suicidal thoughts theologically, which is what we do at SYI. We try to look at everything and talk about it from the perspective of Christians and what Christians have to say about suicide. Christians are called to speak into fear. And we are terrified of talking about this. We are terrified of talking about this. Even when suicides happen in churches, when suicides happen in communities, we use other words, other ways to talk about it to avoid saying that word. We do all in our power to work around this because it's scary and we don't understand it. And so Christians, I think, by giving voice to this, by saying, this is my story, this happens, this happened to me, it begins to open the door and begins to leave room for us to speak into fear. A man who's becoming a mentor to me, his name is Russell Crabtree. Russ, there's a link in your PowerPoint to his website, asecondday.com. And Russ uses this passage, this story of Silas and Paul in prison. If you remember in Acts 16, Paul and Silas have been imprisoned. And as they're in prison that night, they're singing songs, they're praying to God, and the whole jail begins to shake. You remember the story now? The jail starts to shake. The doors bust open, and Paul and Silas stay in their jail cell, and they keep praying. And they hear the guard go outside with a sword to kill himself because he knows that his life's over. All of the prisoners are free. His job he's failed on. And so Paul calls out, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." Do not harm yourself, for we are all here. And that's one of the times in Scripture where suicide is avoided, because Paul calls out, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." And as a result, the jailer's entire family becomes a Christian that night, and there's baptisms, and it's a wonderful celebration. Do not harm yourself, for we are all here. It's this passage that I think speaks so clearly and so beautifully to suicide and suicidal thoughts. This is the way, the beloved community that we want to be as youth pastors, as youth directors, as pastors, as parents. We want to say, with everything that we do, do not harm yourself, for we are all here. Saying it after it happens isn't very effective. Saying it all the time is extremely effective. Saying it over and over again in everything you do, in every way that you possibly can, as pastors, as parents, as children, do not harm yourself, for we are all here. And it's within this context that we're going to continue thinking about and talking about suicide and suicidal thoughts. I have a lot of facts and a lot of figures to give you. It's in understanding the context that I think all of this starts to feel more real, when you start to see the numbers, when you start to hear the number, the impact that suicide and suicidal thoughts have on our lives. The Center for Disease Control every year does a survey of youth risk. They survey in about 38 to 40 states every year. In this survey, it is every risky behavior you could ever imagine, from asthma, all the way to you've got drugs and alcohol, you've got obesity, anything, reckless driving, DUIs, it's all in there. And they survey thousands of youth every year, and they just give percentages on how the youth answer these survey questions. Within this, they have several criteria of how they begin to rate how children, how teenagers are talking about suicide and suicidal thoughts. So we are going to go through those and just to give you a glimpse of what this population, what 10 to 24-year-olds are dealing with, what they're talking about, where they're at. Felt sad or hopeless. I want to indicate to you that this is not depression. Feeling sad or hopeless is not depression. This only meets 2 of the 5 criteria for a clinical diagnosis for depression. If you work with teenagers in a regular capacity, if you live with one, you know that many teenagers could qualify as someone who during the last 12 months before the survey, 29.9% of students grade 9 to 12 had felt so sad or hopeless almost every day for more than 2 weeks in a row that they stopped doing some usual activities. Okay? So this is 2 weeks. They feel really sad. They're down. They don't want to get out of bed. They're not eating. Things just aren't quite right. Okay? So 30% of teenagers said, yes, this is my experience. For at least 2 weeks in the last year, I have felt this sad or hopeless. It's higher among females, lower among males, highest among Hispanic students, then black students, then white non-Hispanic students. The next area, the next degree, is those who have considered suicide. This is thinking about it. You've had thoughts. You've thought maybe my life isn't worth anything. You're starting to have those thoughts. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24. The second leading cause of death. Unintentional injury, accidents, are the leading cause of death. In 2010, there were 4,867 10 to 24-year-old deaths by suicide. 1 in 6 students, or 17%, have seriously considered suicide in the last year. 1 in 6. 1 in 6 between grades 9 to 12. Starting to do some math on your youth groups, okay? 1 in 6 have considered suicide in the last year. Females are more likely than males. The most likely are Hispanic students, then white students, then black students. I've included this racial demographic information. They do not say why it's higher among some races than others. It changes categories. But I think as you begin to notice the rhythm of the numbers, you start to realize something must be happening. Something must be happening that is causing these ebbs and flows. The numbers stay pretty consistent in these categories throughout the years. So you have that they have felt sad or hopeless. Then they've considered suicide. Oh, sorry. And then finally, or not finally, but the next slide is that they have made some sort of suicide plan. And this is where the intensity really changes between someone who's feeling sad and hopeless, and then it moves to those who are actually planning suicide. 1 in 8 students, 13% in grades 9 to 12, had made a suicide plan in the last year. That means if you asked them, do you have a plan to commit suicide, they could say yes, and they would tell you how they were going to do it, okay? 13%. Females, again, are more likely, most likely among Hispanic students, then white, then black students. Next is those who have actually attempted suicide 1 or more times. 1 in 12 students, or 8%, had attempted suicide 1 or more times in the last year. Females are more likely than males. Suicide attempts are much higher amongst Hispanic and Black youth than white and non-Hispanic youth. The next screen is those who have attempted suicide and it has been so severe that it's been treated by a doctor or a nurse. So this is someone who has they have poisoned themselves, they've made an incredible injury to themselves where someone has found them, or they've had an overdose that has been treated by a doctor or nurse. More likely among females than males, more likely among Hispanics than Blacks, than white. I want to take a moment here to talk about sexuality and suicide. There's a very key correlation to students, to children who are struggling with their sexuality, and the number just flies through the roof. You've read stories, you've seen news articles about children who are transgendered or who are dealing with LGBT issues, and it's staggering to see how quickly this number just flies up. For those LGBT youth, they are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. Questioning youth, those questioning their sexuality, are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight peers. Nearly half of young transgender people have seriously thought about taking their lives, and 1/4 report having made a suicide attempt. So this struggling with sexuality in these formative years, where feels like there's no safe place, just drastically increases the rate of suicide attempts and the rate in which students think about suicide. So be aware of that in your youth groups, in your ministries. So now we get to the even harder stuff. Death by suicide. There is a lot of data, a lot of information out there. From 2009 is where there's the best information, so it's always about 4 or 5 years back. In 2009, the most recent year for which data is available, 1,852 young people between the ages of 13 to 19 died by suicide. Approximately 78% were male, 22% were female. This is where the number changes if you've been paying attention to the numbers, right? So it's female, 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 and then when you actually get to death by suicide, males are much more effective. Okay, they use much more violent means. When they get to that point, it is over. Okay? I mean, you look at the numbers, 78% of this number is male. During 2009, an additional 2,702 young people between the ages of 20 and 24 died by suicide. 84% of these fatalities were young men. 16% were young women. And then the next part of the slide gives a more specific breakdown of race. If you've studied social psychology in any way, shape, or form in college, grad school, anywhere, you know that American Indian Alaska Natives in any sort of drug and alcohol, suicide, mental illness is always the highest number. As Christians, consider this. Something is going on here. And the rest of the numbers are what we've discussed there. So it's just, again, something to be aware of, something to know. Suicide methods. The leading methods or means by which young people ages 13 to 19 took their own lives were suffocation, including hanging, firearms, poisoning, including carbon monoxide, and then all other means. And then I just need us to take a moment to remember that there is no fear in love. But perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears is not made perfect in love. And then Acts tells us, do not harm yourself, for we are all here. This is really hard stuff. It's really hard stuff. So as Christians, how do we respond? As leaders in our churches, as laity, as pastors, as youth ministers, as seminary students, what do we do? How do we respond to this thing that we're so afraid to even say the word? How do we embody a community that says, do not harm yourself, we are all here, all the time? How do we say this to children and to youth and adults over and over again? We're going to go back through, essentially, those categories: feeling sad, hopeless, considering suicide, attempting suicide, and go through and talk about responses, what you're looking for in these situations, and how to respond. In children, in youth, the way that children and youth express themselves is through behavior. It's not until you're a junior or senior in high school that you're going to be able to say, I feel depressed. This is what I'm going through. So until that time, what you need to think about in all scenarios is a baseline. Every human being has a baseline of behavior. Some people, if this is the median, some people live way down here. They are just kind of down, they're low, but they're always down and low, right? You can think about kids in your youth group who just are kind of writing weird poetry, and they're just kind of living down here, wearing a lot of black, and they just kind of live in this world, and they're okay. They're happy in this spot. There's other people who live in the middle, right? They're just kind of normal, average mood. Okay? And then you have other people who live in the highs, right? Your job as youth ministers, as parents, as pastors, even in adults, to know what a baseline behavior is, right? What is the normal behavior for a child? Any change in behavior in a child, getting higher or lower, so if their norm is middle and they start acting, really risky, really crazy, things are getting wild, something's up. It might not be suicide. It could be that mom and dad are getting divorced. It could be that they were abused. It could be that somebody's being mean to them at school and they don't know what to do about it. But a change in behavior is what you're looking for. You're always looking for a change in behavior in children. That is what indicates to you that something is wrong. Does that make sense? They are not able to say, this is what is wrong with me. They are going to act it out in their behavior. So, we want to say, we are all here. We are all here. So these signals of warning is for those who are feeling sad and hopeless, or that are considering suicide. These are some of the behaviors that you might see them exhibit. Or say that they're hopeless. They express no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life. They get angry. Some people are naturally, normally angry, right? We all know them, all right? Some people just live in the anger zone. If that's normal, okay, Bobby's fine. But if one day Bobby, who's perfectly, normal, ebb and flow, shoots off and gets angry about everything, you don't understand what's going. This kid's kicking over cans and shouting the F-bomb as he walks out the back door. Hey, something's wrong with Bobby, right? And so we need to be aware of baseline behavior and understand that any change is reason for paying attention. Recklessness or risky behavior, seemingly without thinking, expressions of feeling trapped, like there's nowhere out, increased alcohol or drug usage, the likelihood of committing suicide goes way up when you're using drugs and alcohol. If you're feeling down, if you are exhibiting any of these other issues, and then you add that in with drugs and alcohol, all of a sudden, the likelihood of committing suicide or experiencing any of these other warning signals increases. people who withdraw from friends, family, society, church, anxiety, agitation, inability to sleep or constant sleep, dramatic mood changes, no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life. These are the people who are not at a place where you call 911, right? These are the people who are thinking about suicide. These are the people who are having a hard time. These are the people who we want to be aware of, we want to walk with. We are all here. The response to warning signals. The first thing you need to do, if you see this behavior, or if you're lucky enough for someone to tell you that they're thinking about suicide, that they're having thoughts, that they're feeling hopeless, is to validate and acknowledge what the person is experiencing and establish yourself as a safe person. So something you could say is, I have noticed that you've been experiencing a lot of anger lately, and you're not normally angry. I want you to know that I'm here, and I want you to know that sometimes people who are experiencing anger also think about hurting themselves. Give language to it. Say it. I know that other people who have experienced things like you are experiencing, who have considered their sexuality and don't know what to do about it, think about hurting themselves. I know that happens. Do not expect them to respond, well, guess what? I am. That's not going to happen. But you've established yourself, right, as that safe person. You're saying, I'm not afraid of whatever you can give me. I'm not afraid of it. I know it's happening, and it's okay. If you ever feel that way, you can tell me, I would like you to talk to someone I know and trust. And then that's the referral piece of this. Pastors, youth directors, youth volunteers, we can fall into a very dangerous trap when we think that we are mental health professionals. Yes, all right? You are not a mental health professional, okay? There is no part of your seminary education that has trained you to be a mental health professional. Release yourself of that burden right now. If you are not a licensed social worker, psychiatrist, psychologist, psychotherapist, licensed marriage and family therapist, this is not your job, okay? You may be led to believe that you can handle it. I'm going to say to you, you can't. Pastoral care for mental health is the same thing as pastoral care for physical health. If a parishioner came to you and said, I have a brain tumor, I doubt that your response would be, let's set up some pastoral counseling sessions, I'll solve your problem. Fair? If somebody comes to you and says, I'm feeling really depressed and down, your response probably will be, let's set up a pastoral counseling session. I can help with that. I would like to tell you that your job with the brain tumor and the depressed person is the same. It is pastoral care. The job of a pastor is to walk alongside people in those situations. The difference between pastoral care as a youth pastor or as an ordained clergy and a therapist is, as clergy, you are called to listen. You are called to be present. Listen, be present. As a therapist, you are called to problem solve. Okay? Two totally different things. So when you are confronted with that situation that you have absolutely no idea what to do with, great. Refer. to someone. This is your outlet. You say, I want to walk alongside you in this depression. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to visit you. I'm going to be present the same way I would if you were having a health crisis. The same thing. Okay? So you walk alongside them in that same way, and you refer to a professional. The same way you would say, let's find a neurologist. Let's find a cancer doctor, right? Let's find the best doctor we can to help treat this illness. It is a dangerous trap that pastors fall in, to try to heal mental health issues. You are not trained. And I just want to speak that, give you that freedom. It's okay. Pray for them. Walk alongside them. Be present. Be the light of Jesus Christ in that situation over and over and over again. But do not try to do therapy. Save yourself the agony. Do not try to do therapy. So, if they are in this area of feeling sad or hopeless or considering suicide, you want to refer. If I haven't made that clear, you want to refer. You want to refer. Refer to a mental health professional. Call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for a referral if you do not have it. This is a great number to know. Put it in your speed dial, right? When you're in that moment and you don't know what to do, you don't know who to call them. They're a resource. This is not the SWAT team's going to show up. This is, hey, I'm a pastor and I don't know what to do. Can you help me? I have a parishioner who needs help. If you live in Allegheny County, there are wonderful resources here in Allegheny County. Wonderful. The first one I want you all to know about is the Resolve Crisis Network. It's through UPMC, through Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They are your resource in any sort of crisis, any sort of mental health crisis. Call them. They have a mobile response unit. They'll come to you and your parishioner if need be. Use this resource. If there's even just hey, I'm not really sure what to do, and you just want to float something by them, call them. National Suicide Prevention Hotline 2. Call them. These people live and breathe for that question, right? They sit there 24 hours a day waiting for you to call to ask them an informed question. Do it, all right? Another wonderful resource in the Pittsburgh area is STAR, Services for Teens at Risk. This is also through Western Psych. It is an appointment-based service. This is a place you call 9 to 5 and say, I have a kid who's really at risk. They specialize in suicide attempt, in considering suicide, those sorts of things. But even if it's just the behavior's getting really risky and you're not sure what to do, this is a great resource of calling just, again, for help for yourself, or the parents can call on behalf of the child. All right, so we're going to move from feeling sad, hopeless, considering into attempts or plans. When someone has a plan for suicide or makes an attempt, the response is completely different. Completely different. If someone communicates to you in any circumstance that they are going to attempt suicide, that they have a plan, your response is to call 911. You are not going to talk them off the ledge. You're going to call 911 with your cell phone in one hand, and you're going to be there as much as you can with the other. 911. You are not Superman. 911. If, after you call 911, you feel like it is appropriate to call the National Suicide Hotline, go ahead and do that next. But call 911. If you are in a situation where someone is threatening to hurt themselves or someone else, call 911. Someone is looking for a way to kill themselves, seeking access to pills, weapons, or other means. Someone is talking or writing about death, dying, or suicide. And again, when these actions are out of the ordinary, you've got the kid in your youth group who all they post about on Facebook or all they write about in their journal that they bring to you is death, right? And that's their normal baseline, whether we like it or not, right? But the kid who lives in a more normal place, a more average place, then starts writing about death on Facebook. This says, hey, something's not right here, right? Something's not right here. And so we want to be watching those normal baselines of behavior. A part of any talk on suicide is thinking about and knowing and acknowledging that people listening to this online and that people in this room have thought about suicide. And due diligence says that what we need to do is say that this too is a safe place. And that if there is a situation in which you find yourself personally considering suicide, considering attempting suicide, we want you to call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. We want you to reach out and to find that safe place where you can find help in that situation. Another difficult part of suicide conversations, and this is something that always comes up, is self-injury. This is very little font. Self-injury, which means cutting, burning, picking. If you will know it when you see it, if you have a kid in your youth group who is doing self-injurious picking. This is not actually necessarily suicidal behavior. If you work with 10 to 14-year-old girls, you're going to see it. They're going to do it, and they're probably going to come in and show you that they did it, that they cut themselves. You take it very seriously. It's very serious, but it is not necessarily suicidal behavior. It is typically, because as we talked about the behavioral baselines, it's typically one of those behaviors where they're saying, I need help, something is wrong, and they're doing it by injuring themselves. So it's typically them saying, I need help. And so your response in being not afraid and in saying, we are all here, do not harm yourself, is to say that you speak into that situation too, right? You're still speaking into that situation. And so what I would encourage you to do is, if you are aware of a teenager in your youth group, a child in your youth group who is cutting, who is burning, who is picking at themselves, is to tell that child that you are going to tell their parents, or the child can tell their parents with you there. I would encourage you to know that the child told the parent. There is not a lot more you can do beyond that. Encourage the parent to refer out to a mental health professional. Encourage the parent to get help for the child. Pay attention, watch that behavior, but I would encourage you to make sure that the parents know. And I think our assumption is that parents know what's going on, and a lot of times parents don't know what's going on. And so we want to make sure that our parents are informed on that, or that guardian. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on self-injury. I want to give you just some resources. There's a good video there to watch, and just some other general information if this is something that you're finding is happening in your youth groups with your teenagers to know about. Our goal in being a community that says, do not harm yourself, we are all here, and in being a place where we say, we're not afraid to talk about it. We're not afraid to say that this is real. 1 in 6 kids. I didn't even touch adults. I didn't even get into adults today. People are thinking about hurting themselves. People are hurting themselves. And what better place than the church, the beloved community, the place where we can talk about so many other things? Why can't we talk about this? We need to. We need to be a community that says, God loves you no matter what. And nothing can separate us from the love of God and Jesus Christ our Lord. Nothing. Not even death. And so today, one of the challenges I have for you is to think about how you can incorporate discussions of mental health, of suicide, of illness into your typical youth group, typical liturgy in your church in such a way that it doesn't feel foreign for someone who's thinking about hurting themselves to tell you. That's your goal, is that your church, your youth group becomes such a safe place that it's not normal conversation, but it's established that you are safe enough that they can tell you. Does that make sense? And so I would invite you to consider how to do that. Is it just that while you're praying for the people with cancer, you also pray for people struggling with depression and OCD and ADHD? Do you just name that from the pulpit and say, we know that in addition to wars and rumors of wars, people are having wars within their souls right now? And I think that it sounds so easy, but I've preached in a lot of churches and I've said a lot of prayers, and it's a little hard. It's not normal. It's not our normal protocol to name and to identify mental illness as something that needs prayer. It's something instead that we hide, right? It's my own personal thing. It's private. And though that's okay for you individually, as a church, as a congregation, if we began praying about it, if each youth group here just started praying about it, like it's, happens to everybody else, all of a sudden that kid can say, well, wait, somebody else here thought about committing suicide? Because we know 1 in 6 do, right? We know 30% of them have been so sad in the last year for 2 weeks, they felt so hopeless and sad that they stopped doing things that they would typically do. We know this is happening. So I would encourage you to make it a part of your typical routine. And that's when the conversations can start to happen. When you have established that this is a safe zone, that this is okay. Being a pastor and being a youth minister is really hard work if you haven't figured that out yet, right? This is really hard work. You are with people in the most difficult moments of their lives, and you also get to be there for the best moments of their lives. And it's about walking with them in all of them. And what I encourage you to do is to really include all of them, all of those experiences in your ministry. Mental health is a place not where you need to have all the answers, but where as clergy, where as lay people, if you even just give voice to it, I think you will be shocked at the response you get. So many adults in your congregation are on psychotropic medications. So many. So many children in your congregation are in therapy, and so many adults are. So many pastors in this presbytery are in therapy, and they don't want anybody to know. Okay? And your responsibility, I hope, becomes to give voice to this. To say, it's okay. I have suicide in my family. I've had suicidal thoughts before. I have friends who have had depression issues. Give voice to that. And all of a sudden, your ministry will change. In the next several months, there are a lot of events that are coming up in the Pittsburgh area dealing with suicide and mental health issues. I really just want to give you that information so you have it. Mental Health First Aid is a great event. And also here on campus, Russ Crabtree, who I talked to you about, said his verses that do not harm yourself. We are all here. He'll be here in April doing a day-long seminar on this and on incorporating it further into your ministry. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of both of those opportunities. In conclusion, I'm just thrilled at the opportunity to continue these conversations, and I'd invite any of you who have ideas, topics that you'd like to share, that you'd like to think about more fully together. I know this is a hard one, but we can take on more hard ones or fun ones or whatever you want in between. There's just a board in the back, and I really invite you all to write down any of your ideas for topics in the future. And we'll also be accepting any responses, any questions, any thoughts at syi@pts.edu. Thank you all very much. I'm going to go ahead and turn off, or can you turn off the recording, Dare? And we can go ahead and do some questions. Yeah, so go ahead, guys. That's the end of the slideshow. Yay! So yeah, so what do you guys, thanks for letting me